and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, a couple of quick housekeeping items. We're continuing to operate under the remote participation process that we've been doing for several weeks now, as authorized under the governor's executive order on remote participation. As such, we'll be following our standard discipline process around how we handle discussion. We'll round robin it. I'll just call on people. And all of our votes will be taken on a roll call basis, just as we've been doing for the last several weeks. Select Woman Nancy McKenzie is not able to make it this evening. She's, as many of you know, is a nurse in Boston in one of the major facilities and is on the front lines on the COVID thing, so she's not able to make it tonight, and our thoughts go out to her. So with that all said, we're going to go to new business and our first order of business, which is a hearing for the Eversource Energy and a request to obtain a grant of location to install some conduit in Glenwood Avenue with the new development that's going on there. We've got Jerry LaRusso here tonight with us. So Jerry, I'm going to ask you to just speak briefly to what the project is all about. And then our town engineer, Carl Baldoff, is with us as well. And I'll just ask Carl if he has anything else to add before we get into discussion. So Jerry, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you for letting me join your meeting this evening. As you know, we've been working for about 2.5 years with Eversource to get to the point where we could remove the poles on Glenwood and place them underground. As you know, they've filed a petition with you for the grant of location. All along, we've felt that this was really the right way to address Glenwood. I think it's going to really tie Glenwood into the downtown by having those poles down, everything underground, and just a nice, more downtown sidewalk feel to it. We had committed to the planning board when we got our site plan approval to work with Eversource to accomplish this. Not knowing that it was going to take 2.5 years to accomplish, but I think everyone feels it's a much better project and a much better presentation for Glenwood.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, and I'm glad to see that this is the final outcome. I remember when you were here some months ago, we were talking about connecting into the corner there down on Glenwood. And I really like the idea of burying these utilities and really making it a whole better looking situation there. So thanks for staying with that and bringing this to fruition. So Carl, anything that you want to say before I open it up to discussion with the board?
To the chair, I agree with Mr. LaRusso's comments, and I visited this site along with the assistant town engineer and the project manager, Joe Bartuca, before we wrote the memorandum to the board. And we agree the location is feasible and we're all set.
Great, thanks, Carl. So let's do a quick round robin for discussion. David, I'll start with you. Any questions for Jerry or Carl?
I agree it's a needed response or needed renovation to that area. Those lines would have been, I think, dangerously close to the side of the building, especially a residential building. I think it will give some added space sidewalk as well. So I think both of those, for both of those reasons, it's a good response, and I'm glad the planning board requested that change. I just have one question. Has there been a stop work order or some problem at that corner? I see that there's some work has been done there, and what was done, and was that permitted work that has been done already?
I'm not sure, David, where you mean.
be right at the corner of, I've had some public, there's been a Facebook post and some information about work at the corner of Glenwood and East.
No, nothing's been stopped. As you recall, along East Street, we put the sidewalk in, took the barriers down. They installed the crosswalk, the solar crosswalk signs, but no, there hasn't been any stoppage of work on that corner.
Okay. I'm fine. I'm good. Thank you. And I think this will, again, be a vast improvement to that little corner.
Great. Thanks, David. Mark, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, I think this is a good solution, and will look good when it's done. Thank you.
Okay, and Ben?
Sure. So for anyone that's listening or watching this that doesn't know off the top of their head where Glenwood is, you know what we're talking about. If you're standing at Walpole Cooperative Bank with your back to the bank and you look across the intersection at where the old Bank of America is, that old building, it's the little cut-through street that runs down to East Street, and it kind of goes between that intersection and Main Street and East Street. And that's one of the access ways to the public parking lot that's back behind in there. So I think that putting these lines on the ground is a great idea, not only for safety reasons, but also for visibility. I think it was Jerry that you mentioned, and I think that this is, instructive, and I think we should take some ideas from this, other landowners downtown and the town itself to look at some of these other areas downtown where we have a lot of poles, specifically behind jalapenos, by the fields there, and see what we can do. And as we're doing some of this other construction, or other folks are, to keep an open mind about what we can do there. It really improves the sight lines and the whole environment. So, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ben. So I'll entertain a motion.
Do we need to, I have here a motion to open the hearing. Is that what you want to do first, or are we gonna, we need to do that?
So I didn't think this was a public hearing.
It's, if I could chime in, Jim, it's
Sure.
a hearing with, between Eversource and the developer. There's no Cindy and I went back and checked because I was questioning whether or not we needed public input in this. So Ben's right. Let's just cover all our bases, open the public hearing. We allowed the developer to provide some input. We went around, but let's just go through the formality. Thank you, Ben.
Okay, go ahead, Ben.
Okay. Okay, I would make a motion to open the hearing for Eversource Energy, consistent with the information listed in the agenda.
I'll second that.
Okay, roll call vote. All in favor, please say aye. Mark?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Ben?
Yeah.
And Jim, aye. 400. We're now in hearing. Jim, do we need to go through the process of closing the hearing?
I would just move that we incorporate the language the discussion that was just made into the public hearing.
I agree with David, and we'll make sure Cindy reflects that in the minutes.
Great, thank you. Do we need to take a step to close the hearing, Jim?
I close the hearing and then take a vote on it.
Okay, Ben?
Okay. I make a motion to close the hearing for Eversource Energy, consistent with the information listed in the agenda, and with the observation of David Salvatore's comments as part of the meeting minutes.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion a second. Roll call vote. David?
Aye.
Ben?
Yes.
Mark?
Aye.
Jim, aye. We're now out of the hearing. Motion for the matter at hand now?
So I'd make a motion to approve the request for obtaining a grant allocation to install approximately 406 feet of conduit at pole 8/115A, and to install 2 manholes on Glenwood, and to apply for a street opening permit as required by the town engineer.
I'll second that.
Okay, David?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Ben?
Yes.
And Jim, aye. 400. The motion carries. Jerry, thanks very much, and thanks for all the great work you're doing down there. The place looks great.
I appreciate it, and we hope to be finished up soon.
Yeah, that would be terrific. So we look forward to that day. Thank you.
Thank you again.
And Carl, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next order of business is a request from Carol Johnson, who is the manager of the Walpole Farmers Market, based on Governor Baker adding Massachusetts farmers markets to the list of essential services. This request is to begin opening the farmers market on Saturday, June 13th. And the market would be open at 9 a.m. and close at 1 p.m. And they would be open through Saturday, October 21st. Carol is writing to ask that we use the Springbrook Park, which is the park adjacent to the town hall. This is their 4th year at that location. She says that it's a great location and they enjoy being there. So she also indicates that she will give us a copy of the liability insurance, and that, Jim, I believe that is in hand.
Yes, and I asked Melissa to join us because obviously with the Board of Health approval, I wanted to let the board know Melissa and I have talked through this. She's comfortable with approving this. It's specified that this is allowed. So, Melissa, anything to add?
Good evening. Thank you, members of the board. So obviously they are allowed. However, I would strongly urge certain policies and procedures are put into place because it is a public space and there will be room for error and possible contact. So we just want to make sure that I would prefer right now for farmers market, realistically only food vendors come in front of the health department and we review their application. I personally would feel more comfortable if all vendors were to come through the health department, because then that way we could make sure, it's not saying that we have to issue them a permit or they pay a fee, but more or less we have a dialogue and a conversation with them to make sure they're adhering to limiting the number of individuals in the market. So a lot of this will fall on the market manager. However, each individual vendor would have responsibilities of their own. Social distancing is key, so we would want to make sure that we have adequate signage that could be potentially on tables or at access points. We would want to work closely with public safety, as I know we've done in the past with farmers markets, to assure that enforcement could potentially be there, that there be any issues with individuals not adhering to social distancing or any other physical concerns. We want to make sure that lines were monitored to assure that social distancing did occur. So whether that would be brown markings, cones, we would work with the market manager on this. And this would all be dependent on how many vendors there were to be. So I think just having a layout of the area, what potentially our maximum vendor capacity could be, and then going from there with a layout. We'd also want signage in place to make sure that it's well aware to the employees as well as the customers coming in that if they're sick whatsoever, they should not be coming to the farmers market. It's encouraged per DPH that there should realistically be hand washing stations within the proximity of the farmers market. I know that there hasn't been in the past. They say hand sanitizer is not in place of a hand wash sink, so potentially a portable hand washing, if that's something we would recommend. And then obviously given the mandate of the masks, all staff and all individuals coming into the farmers market should be wearing masks, and all of the staff should be wearing gloves as well. Obviously, as you know, they're discouraging any reusable bags to be brought in. This applies for grocery stores, so it would also apply for farmers markets. That being said, we would encourage vendors to use recyclable paper goods, compostable bags, things along that nature. We would obviously encourage, similar to what you see in the world now, pre-sale. So like if people can order things ahead of time and maybe just pick it up there to limit the actual contact at one time in one location. Obviously limiting cash transactions. So if there's vendors at the farmers market that have the capability to have people pay ahead of time, that would obviously strongly be urged as well.
So what I would recommend is if the board's going to approve this, approve it with the potential caveat that it's approved with that the market manager submit a COVID-19 plan to be approved and on file with the Board of Health Department. Does that make sense, Melissa?
Definitely.
Okay, great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. let me just do a quick round robin for discussion. Mark, I'll start with you. Mark?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. I think the farmer's market is a great thing, and you know, as long as we can do it safely, I'm all in favor of it. So I like the ideas that Melissa put forward.
Great, thanks, Mark. David?
Yeah, I've seen that. I think it was Brookline that opened theirs back up, and you know, public is certainly very happy about it. I did note that in an article I read that they did have some restrictions about how many people were in the area of the farmers market, and I'm sure Ms. Ranieri will take care of that in her review. And I think we can do this and do it safely.
Thanks, David. Ben?
No comment. Thanks, Jim.
Okay.
Sounds good.
I'll just comment that I think the farmers market is one of those very cool things that we do around here. Very pleased to see it coming back online, and hopefully it's a sign of better things to come. Obviously, with all of the caveats that Melissa has raised, we need to do it safely. So with that, I'll entertain a motion. So Ben?
So I'll make a motion to approve the request to hold the farmers market beginning on June 13th, 2020, with the stipulation that the market manager submit a COVID-19 plan to be approved and held on file at the Board of Health office.
I'll second that.
Okay. Round robin vote. Mark?
Aye.
Ben?
Yes.
And David?
Aye.
Jim, aye. 4-0-0. Motion carries. Thank you. Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
Okay, next order of business, we've got Police Chief Carmichael with us to talk about the Governor's Order 2020-03, which is an amendment to the COVID-19 Order number 31, which is going to require wearing of masks, and also an agreement with the Board of Health to deputize our officers as health agents for the town. So, Chief, why don't I turn it over to you to step us through this? Thanks. Chief, I think you might be on mute.
How's that?
Much better, thanks.
Sorry about that. Good evening, everybody. So going back to March 10th of this year, Governor Baker declared the state of emergency. And after he did that, he first came out with Order 13, and that order there was the one where you know, the closing of non-essential businesses, the social gatherings of people that were more than 10 people, or if there were groups of less than 10 people, then that would, you know, prevent anybody from being involved in physical activity, recreational activity, that kind of thing. So when that order came out, there was written into the order was the enforcement mechanism, and that was, first offense was to be a warning and the dispersal notice. The second offense was to be a $300 fine that would be on a Town of Walpole bylaw 21D, the non-criminal disposition tickets that we use for bylaw violations. And then on the third offense, you know, if it was a repeated or willful type of a situation, you know, it could go all the way up to criminal penalties and a $500 fine. Then later on, back on, I think it was May 1st, the governor came out with Order 31. And that order is the one where he required citizens, anybody over the age of 2, to wear a mask or a covering over their face when they're out in public place, whether indoors or outdoors. And this includes pharmacies and stores and livery vehicles, public transportation, all that type of thing. That one there required again on a $300 fine on the non-criminal disposition bylaw tickets. In addition to that, when the governor declared his orders, he referenced the law under the Board of Health, or DPH, which made it the Board of Health or the Department of Public Health to be the primary enforcement mechanism to enforce his orders. And with that was a stipulation that they could also, the Board of Health or the DPH could use agents, including police officers, to help them and assist them in enforcing the governor's orders. And so we kind of looked at that, and from our perspective, we've, since this whole thing started, we've had such a great partnership with the Board of Health and with Melissa and her team. And, you know, we knew that undoubtedly the police department was going to get involved in some of these situations, especially with the non-essential businesses and that type of thing. But with the language that existed, we thought it would be good for us to participate and to partner with the Board of Health through a memorandum of understanding or a memorandum of appointment, where our police officers could act as agents under the Board of Health to assist them so that we can, you know, basically keep Walpole as safe as possible as we, you know, work through this pandemic. So essentially the police officers would be agents of the Board of Health. And Melissa presented that to the Board of Health, and then they authorized her to sign off on that agreement between the police chief and the public health director. And so that got us to the point where we are now. As far as enforcement on the street, you know, we're going to look at it as a community policing type of strategy, where we're not going to go out there and basically be the mask police, but we're going to partner with the Board of Health, and we're going to try and seek voluntary compliance. So if we do see observations where somebody is violating the orders, especially where there's willfulness, misconduct, or where there's even negligence. You know, we get stores and that type of place where people might be congregated, and we're going to get calls for these types of things. So we want to be prepared in how we're going to deal with it. One of the things we're going to do is we have these flyers. I did send these to the board. We had these flyers made up that we'll use as an educational and awareness type thing, where we can, you know, if we get calls or complaints, we could use these flyers. And basically what it does, it explains the order and what the requirements are as a way to educate and keep the public aware of what's going on. You know, in worst case scenarios, you know, we could cite the person, but like I said, there'd have to be, the officer's going to exercise discretion, and there would have to be some willful negligence type of a situation where we would do that. And then as a last resort, there's always the criminal aspect. And we're hoping that in stores and locations like that, that it doesn't escalate to something like that. But so for the most part, it's a community policing initiative, and that's how we're going to look at it.
Great. Chief. Melissa, let me go to you and see if you have anything that you'd like to add to that.
I think Chief said it all. I'm very appreciative for the Walpole Police. I think I totally agree with Chief Carmichael. We've had an amazing relationship throughout this whole process, and obviously it's the unknown to all of us, so I really am very grateful for their support. Like he referenced, we've had a few complaints regarding businesses that, you know, were operating that should have not been operating, and were non-essential. So whenever the police are out and they see something, they let me know, and then our office can take action to follow up directly. So we are very appreciative of the relationship that we have.
Great, thank you, Melissa. So we'll do some discussion for either Melissa or the chief. So Ben, why don't I start with you this time? Any questions or comments for either the chief or Melissa?
No, I don't have any questions. I just want to say I really appreciate the coordination and communication that's gone on, you know, within the town at large, certainly between the Board of Health and the police department. You know, those are the sorts of things that we need to be doing, and it makes a huge difference, not in just how the town is run, but then how the communication of the expectations makes it out to the residents, and everyone's on the same page and knows what is expected of them. And that's how we have to move forward, because unless we do it together, it's not going to work, and it's just going to be a lot of conflict and strife. So if we can pull together and adhere to these measures that help us protect each other and our neighbors and our families, then I think we can make it work. So I look forward to working with both the Board of Health and the police department as we go through this, I'm sure things will change, right? They change weekly, so we just need to be adaptable and keep that communication clear. So thank you for everything you're doing.
Thanks, Ben. David, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, I like the idea of the educational and community police first aspect of the enforcement. I also wonder whether or not there are any masks that we can give out as part of that enforcement, so that when you arrive at a scene and someone's in a store or in a location that they don't have a mask, that we can just give them a mask and they can wear the mask and crisis averted, and no conflict there. And also maybe I know there's some donations and things in the budget for giveaways. I wonder if a Walpole police bandana or something that we can give out just to for the young people and some of the people who don't have any face covering, just to again, so that it's not a conflict. Someone who's just trying to go to the store and get something doesn't have their mask, and just take a mask and move on. Just something to think of. And I do appreciate what the police have done so far, and I do appreciate that it's going to be again, instructional and community educational and community policing thing. I think it sends. I hope we never get to the point where we're arresting people for not having a mask on in a particular place. I think people, for the most part, want to cooperate and want to protect others. Realistically, the mask doesn't protect the individual wearing it, but it protects the other people, and that's why I wear it, to protect the people that I'm at the cash register and the people in the store.
Thanks, David. Chief, let me go back to you and Melissa, if you want to just respond to the question about the mask that David asked.
Sure. So we do have, in our cruises, we have boxes of the surgical masks that we're definitely more than willing, and it's a great idea to, if we come across somebody that doesn't have one, that we could help provide that. The other thing is the Attorney General just tonight sent a memo to Mass Chiefs where she wants to purchase or supply all the police departments exactly for that purpose, so that she would give us masks that we could distribute while we're out in the street and come across people that don't have them, and that would be really great. And I totally, Selectman Salvatore's points to, a lot of this comes down to, common courtesy and just kind of taking care of your community, taking care of your fellow citizens. I mean, even myself, I've been out a couple of times and didn't have my mask, and you get the looks, you get the evil eyeball, so it's it's good. We could keep those in the car and everything. But yeah, there's some good. We do have some supply where we can do that, and with the Attorney General's help, hopefully that can go even further.
Thanks, Chief. Melissa, anything to add?
No, I agree. I definitely agree. I think it's nice if we can provide it to someone, given the circumstance, if they're unable to provide their own.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. Mark, I'll go to you next.
I just say I agree with Ben and David. When I've been out, it seems like people are generally following the rule, wearing the mask, which is great. I would ask the question of either Melissa or the Chief. Have you run into many cases where people are not wearing a mask and you have to remind them, or are most people sort of doing the right thing?
I feel for the most part everyone's doing the right thing. I think also we're fortunate to have some great establishments within Walpole, so they're kind of the stopping force of if individuals didn't have a mask, they wouldn't allow anyone in. But I think as a whole, just being on the streets and being in establishments, I am seeing a lot of people adhere, and children, adults. So I think people are aware, and I think people are doing their part, which is huge.
I agree with that. I think the vast majority of people are trying to comply with what the orders are. They want to do the right thing. For the most part, that's what we're coming across. Part of the educational part too is that some people misunderstand the orders. So we've gotten a couple of calls where they're just reporting that somebody's out for a run, somebody's on the sidewalk without a mask. And the only time that the mask is required is when that person anticipates that they're going to be within that social distancing, that 6 foot kind of limit that's been set. So, you're probably going to see a lot of people that are out there for a run, for a walk, by themselves, or maybe even with their spouse or something like that, where they may not have it on. But it's really only the point when they become engaged with other people that the requirement kind of kicks in.
Thanks, Chief. So, and likewise, I agree. I won't restate everything that everyone has said, but I agree with everything that's been said and certainly support the request. One thing I do want to say is, Melissa, I think you're doing just an outstanding job. If I think about the sort of the baptism by fire that you're going through here, as you stepped into the roles that at the end of last year, you are doing a tremendous job, and I really appreciate all the transparency and good counsel that you're bringing into this process. So thank you.
Thank you. It's definitely a group effort, and I appreciate it. Definitely. I think Robin's thanking her lucky star she retired when she did. There were already huge shoes to fill, but pandemic just totally upped the ante.
Well, thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, do we need 2 motions here for what the chief is requesting?
Oh, so on your end, Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, the Board of Health already took the action. John,
Okay.
do you need action from the board?
No, we more just wanted to, keep them informed as to what we were doing. I know we did get into the whole issues of just the officers' peace of mind when they are confronted with having to stop somebody in those situations, to just legally and constitutionally and everything else kind of falls into play, and they just feel more comfortable doing their job. So I appreciate the Board of Health and the list and everything, and Jim for helping out in getting that all done. So it helps us feel better and more comfortable in dealing with these situations.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chief. Thanks, Melissa, for being here tonight.
Thank you. I am stepping off. I have a Board of Health meeting, but I will jump back on.
Okay, thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
Okay, so next up is we've got Jack Fisher here from the Board of Assessors. They have a request to vote a certain section of a bill that extends the deadline for real estate exceptions from April 1 to June 1 for disabled vets, blind, elderly, and surviving spouse, and a tax deferral. So, Jack, what I'd like you to do is if you just step us through what the request is, and then we'll have some discussion and take a vote. Jack, you're on mute. Jack, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
Better, I think.
Much better. Thank you.
When you voted to extend the deadline for the tax due date, there also was the possibility, and most cities and towns have done this, to extend the date for the due date for the exemptions. And that's what this is all about. In all honesty, I don't expect that it's going to take a look. There are going to be a lot of people that will take advantage of this, because if you're in one of these categories, you know about it. It's not changing the criteria or changing the date or eligibility. All it is changing the deadline for application from April 1st to June 1st. And there is a typo. It's not real estate exceptions. It's real estate exemptions.
Okay.
So we would ask you to vote in favor of this, and what this does is this allows us to accept any applications for any of these exemptions up through June 1st. Normally, the period for application expires on April 1st.
Okay, thanks, Jack. So we'll do some Q&A with Jack. So Mark, I'll start with you. Any questions for Jack?
No questions.
Ben?
No questions.
And David?
No questions. Thanks for noticing that and taking care of that, Jack.
Yeah, likewise. No questions from me. Thank you, Jack. So Ben, we'll hear a motion.
I make a motion to approve the request of the assessors of Section 10, Part 4 of Bill number 4598 that will extend the deadline for real estate exemptions from April 1st to June 1st for disabled veterans, blind, elderly, surviving spouse, and tax deferral.
I'll second that.
Okay, a motion and a second, so we'll round robin the vote. Mark?
Aye.
Ben?
Yeah.
David?
Aye.
And Jim? Aye. 4-0-0, the motion carries. Thanks very much, Jack. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Okay.
Jack.
Good night. Okay, next up we have a vote for, we have a request for a vote for deficit spending and to sign a letter in accordance with Bulletin 2020-01 from the state of Massachusetts in the amount of $750,000. So Jim, why don't you step us through this, because I know there's been a lot of questions around what this actually means, why we're doing it, why we need to do it, et cetera. So if you could just address that.
Sure.
From the dialogue.
So I asked Jody to join us. So Jody, feel free to jump in if I miss anything, or at the end if you have anything to add. So what this is requesting is to authorize the town to move ahead with up to $750,000 in deficit spending if we need it for COVID-19. So what have we done so far for COVID-19? We have about $64,000 in expenses between mostly the fire department, police department, and DPW, which includes cleaning of the police and fire stations at the beginning of this, when we had a scare. About $6,000 in masks at one point, sanitizer, purchasing additional PPEs and outfitting some of the police and fire personnel when necessary, disinfecting the building, traffic signs for the exterior of most of the public buildings here in town, wipes, and some legal fees that we've had so far. So what we've done, at least with those expenses, for the most part, we've attached it to each budget. And, you know, if it was a building cleaning, Don Anderson's budget paid for it. But we want to be eligible to go back and put that into this account that Jody's gone ahead and set up, so we can go forward and get reimbursement from the state and federal government whenever that comes forward. On the salaries end of it, we've incurred about $64,382,000, mostly in overtime coverage for police and fire personnel. There's been a couple of incidences where they've had to relieve hurt people, put them on a quarantine, make sure they get tested, and make sure that they're safe. And we've had to fill that with overtime in each department. And we've also had a little bit of salary hit on the Board of Health side, but we did obtain a grant for about $19,000 on that. But I just want to mention that for the Board of Health. For all the furloughs that we've recently done, right now we have about $122,000 in liability for furloughs on the school side, because they furloughed about 80 people in cafeteria and after-school programs and a few other programs. Those people, their furloughs end effective the end of the school year, June 19th. So they have an end date in sight. Our people on the town side, the library and the recreation employees that we furloughed, there is no end date in sight. I don't know when we are going to bring them back to work. I don't know when the restrictions are going to be eased in some of these public buildings. They're probably going to be some of the last buildings to come online. So I don't know what our liability, but it at least gives us the ability to charge us off to this, I'll call it the COVID account, to ensure that we're able to cover it. Our auditor actually recommended it last week when we had a conference call with myself, Jody, and Marilyn. I want to be able to cover our bills, but I also want to make sure that we're able to get reimbursed whenever that comes. As far as the unemployment, we don't know where we stand with unemployment. We haven't received a bill from the Division of Unemployment since March. We're not the only town. They haven't sent out bills to most of the cities and towns, as far as we know, because they're so backlogged and they don't really know how to deal with the CARES money, which is supposed to be a 50% reimbursement to cities and towns who furlough their employees. So I don't know what our bill is going to look like. This gives us some flexibility in those couple of accounts. Jody, before we open it up, did I miss anything?
The only thing I want to add is that I don't believe that we're going to reach that $750,000 deficit. I think we're going to be pretty far from it. But I just wanted to include that amount so that we were covered. I think that's about it. Jim covered everything else.
Okay, well, thank you. So, yeah, I'm glad that you bring this to us, because it's important that we take advantage of the opportunity to recapture these costs that we're incurring that we had no idea that we were ever going to incur as this pandemic, unfolded. So I'm glad that we're going to have this conversation tonight and get clarity on why we're doing it and so forth. It's really important. So let's open it up for discussion now. Mark, why don't I just start with you? Any questions for Jim or Jody?
No questions. I'll just say I think it's a good idea to be able to put all our COVID costs together and try to get some reimbursement for that. So thanks, Jody, and Marilyn, whoever else was involved, Jim, thinking of that idea and bringing it before us. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. David, I'll go to you next.
Sure. So what my understanding is, obviously none of these expenditures were in the budget, and so we are incurring costs that exceed what was in the budget. And we're calling that a deficit. But is it in fact true that, or what is the status of our cash? Do we have cash to pay these things? Do we have money to pay these things even though they are not budgeted? Is this money, as you indicated, I believe, and I just wanted to clarify, is that this money is coming from current accounts, that the money was budgeted for other needs, but is now available for this. I just wanted to clarify that, we're able to pay our bills. It's just that it's not consistent with how we had it allocated in the budget, as far as I understand. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. So what we did at the beginning of all this, I think maybe the third week in March, we put a spending freeze, hiring freeze in place before all these regulations came out. And we froze all accounts except for COVID-related costs, emergency-related items, contractual items, and utilities. So that really freed up, that stopped all the projects that were in the works. Everybody has to come to Jody and I to get approval. Like a couple weeks ago, we approved a fertilizer purchase for the fields. And if Don Anderson needs some plaster, he needs to come through us, both of us, and get approval. So that helped free up some money in some of those budgets because those projects simply weren't getting done and they were getting put on hold. Jody, did I miss anything?
Just wanted to add that cash flow wise, we're fine. That's not the issue. And we don't anticipate an issue at this point either. So that's about it. Agree with you, Jim.
Okay. David, you all set?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that when people were hearing the word deficit, I didn't want people to think that we were in a hole. Thanks.
And Ben?
I have no further questions. This seems very reasonable. Thank you for the explanation, and thanks, Jody, for joining us.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, and I don't have any further questions either. I will say that little recap you just did about what we did way back in the beginning was a helpful reminder to how well we've been running the process, Jim. And I just want to thank you and your team for just you got ahead of it, you stayed on top of it. And what I hear from our legislative delegation is that Walpole is one step ahead of every other town. And I got to say that that's a testament to the great work you and your team are doing, and I really appreciate it, Jim.
Thanks. Everybody's doing a great job.
Yeah, really are, and under very, very, very difficult circumstances, so thank you all. Okay, so Ben, a motion, please.
Make a motion to approve the request of the town treasurer for deficit spending in accordance with Bulletin 2020-01 in the amount of $750,000.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion and a second. We'll vote it now. Mark?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Ben?
Yes.
And Jim, aye. 4-0-0. The motion passes. Jody, thanks very much for your assistance on that.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have a discussion on the lease agreement for the Mylod Field. So quick tee up on this. We've brought this back a couple of times. This is the every 5-year lease agreement that we have with the Walpole Youth Soccer Association to lease the fields that they manage on our behalf and run. So that lease is going to be expiring in August, so we want to make sure that we take care of that lease in the not too distant future. Given that Nancy is not here tonight, I prefer not to actually take a vote on this because I think it should be a vote of the full board. So I'm going to ask the board to allow me to defer that out until the next meeting. However, I would like to make sure that we have discussion tonight because I know we've got a number of questions that David, you had been asking of Walpole Youth Soccer, and I know that they've responded. And I think that I want to make sure we have dialogue around that response and see where we want to go next. So, David, why don't I just turn it over to you, since you asked the questions, and see, how the responses to those questions feel to you. And really, the question is, where would you like to go from here? So, David, I'll give it to you.
Okay. So my basic bottom line is the fact that I don't think that one organization should have exclusive control over a piece of town property, and I don't think that one organization should have basically pay no fees on that property. But given the current situation where I don't know if they're going to have their spring, I don't know the situation. I suspect they're not going to have their seasons as they had planned. Their fall season may also be in jeopardy. They've already collected fees for the spring season. Obviously, the fees would come in for the fall season as this expires in August. But and I'm sure that the boards and their committees have not had an opportunity to meet and discuss this in full detail. So I would suggest that I have no problem deferring the vote on this and the discussion on this. I think this needs, I would like to meet with members of the Youth Soccer League, and I'm willing to at least, I think before this meeting, and I'd forgotten that it was an August deadline, but I was thinking that at least extend the current situation till December, or we can go to February or next year anyway, and have this discussion in the meantime, because I think one of the things that if we are going to discuss fees, I'd like to have their input on, what if they want to continue maintenance, whether we can change the fees in comparison to other town properties. I certainly think that I appreciate the money that they've put into their the properties at this point, but I think we've more than paid them back by not charging them any fees for these properties at this point. And then I see that they have a discussion about what they want. They want to do some further improvements, which to this point I haven't heard anything about what those improvements would be. Again, this is town land; it shouldn't be exclusive by one organization. But if they want to, do improvements, let's discuss that. It's interesting that with the new fields, I know that there's been moves to try and raise money from the various potential users of the property to add to the current facilities. As people may recall, that certain parts of the facility were not funded, and people are out raising money for those facilities. I don't think there's been any discussion as to reducing the fees that are going to be paid by those users. I certainly think we can come to some kind of agreement that makes this fair and open for all participants. And that, maybe an adult league wants to use these fields and should be allowed to use these fields, or some other league should be allowed to use these fields. Having said that, I think this is a discussion that we need to have among, perhaps the rest of the board has already decided what they want to do with this. Maybe, a discussion will be futile. But I certainly think giving this at least till December, given the current situation, I have no problem with extending it under the current situation, or again till the following February if we think we need more time. But as far as a 5-year lease, I don't think I'm certainly not ready to. And I'm not even sure if the lease is the appropriate term for this, but ready to go forward with a 5-year.
So, David, do you have any other questions that you need Walpole Youth Soccer to address in the interim?
Yeah, these questions did raise other questions that I think might, more conducive to a face-to-face meeting or even a, a Zoom meeting or something like that. More of a discussion about, whether they want to continue doing their own maintenance, whether or not the town would do maintenance, whether or not, whether their maintenance protocol is something that we are willing to take over. These are all issues that I think probably warrant a face-to-face meeting, and then for their board to discuss the choices among themselves as well, which I'm not sure that they've had an opportunity to do in the short few weeks that we've between compiling this information and this meeting.
So when I mentioned that we were going to defer the vote, my point was that we were going to defer the vote until we had a full board, because I thought this was an important thing that we're discussing here for all the reasons that you've been citing, and I wanted to make sure we had all 5 members of the board here to take that vote. So what I proposed when I said that was in the next 2 weeks. So my intent, David, is to put this back on the agenda for 2 weeks from now to vote it. Now, we can have conversation now or at that meeting in 2 weeks, and happy to have that conversation, but it's not my intent to push out the lease agreement out to December and create, a whole need to do all kinds of new legal paperwork and all that kind of stuff. We have an agreement in place that has all of the proper language in it to extend the lease, and so my objective would be to get the board to vote on that when we have a full board, because I want all 5 members present. So, Ben, let me throw it over to you to see if you have anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, sure. I guess first and foremost, I really appreciate all the information that Walpole Youth Soccer put together. It was quite the production of documents, as it were, and so I really appreciate that. I know it wasn't something that just took them 5 minutes, and also I know Jim Johnson, you've got a lot on your plate these days, and I appreciate you facilitating that as part of this discussion. I mean, there's all the financials in there that one would need to come to a decision on this. So I'd love to hear another option as to what people think this should be as far as a dollar value. We have all of this lease information, we have maintenance information, and when I look at it and I crunch the numbers, it's all pretty much a break even. It's not a money-making venture for the town. It's not a windfall for the town. If we were to take this over, work out some sort of new lease deal, the maintenance expenditures that Walpole Youth Soccer rolls out there for every season seem consistent with the outside consultants' information that we got. So, from an information standpoint, it seems that we have what we need to make a decision here. And it sounds like the question is more of, well, how does the town want to move forward with some of these agreements, and how does the town want to support these groups? And I know that right now there's only one group, youth sports group soccer, that has a sort of agreement. So it's really kind of opened my eyes to how this is all set up. And so, I appreciate that, and I appreciate David bringing up this discussion, because for those of us who may not have been around back 25, 30 years ago when some of this started taking place and the land was purchased and whatnot, they would know this backstory and how Walpole Youth Soccer was started. Everybody knows them as this big organization. Certainly they do a lot for our community, a big part of the recreational organization, getting kids out to play, outdoors, exercise, all those good things. But this agreement and these types of public-private partnerships are what really allow organizations like Walpole Youth Soccer to grow, to thrive, and to be a part of the community, and to put that money back into facilities, right? Those Mylod fields, granted it's only youth soccer that uses them, but they are top-notch, excellent facilities at the town's disposal for soccer. And so I know that there's a lot of other recreational sports, and I know that lacrosse, for example, is a fast-growing sport here in town. I think that every opportunity we can give these recreational groups to have a leg up and to be able to give back to the town and to be a part of the community just makes us stronger, not only as an athletic town, which Walpole is, but also as a community, to give our kids that recreational outlet. So it's great information, and I guess absent some sort of other option, this seems like a good deal, and it seems like it's enabled really a positive kind of a codependence between the town, the residents, and Walpole Youth Soccer, which is a great thing. You know, when we work together, we can do better things than when we're conflicted and we tear each other apart. So I'd like us to see us actually investigate more of these types of deals with recreation groups in town, and have recreation groups feel that they're supported to come forward with these kind of aggressive ideas for what they want to do here and how they want to be involved in the community. But I guess to wrap up, I would say, what are we going to talk about next meeting, Jim? I mean, what's the other option on the table? Are we just going to vote on continuing this lease, or is there some other option out there that I haven't heard of?
Well, from my perspective, I'm not seeing any other option. I mean, I did the same thing you did. I looked through the numbers. You know, we got them from Vertex, we got them from Weston and Sampson. Of course, we have the numbers from Walpole Youth Soccer already. And I have to say that Walpole Youth Soccer does a pretty amazing job of maintaining those fields at really the lowest price point of the three comparative points we have by far. And I think a lot of that is because of the volunteer work that happens within Walpole Youth Soccer. But they're also just really smart about the way they go about doing things. And it's hard for me to believe that there's a more efficient option. More importantly, you know, if I just go back in time, and you know, I was 2 years in town, I guess, when this happened. But at the time, I remember thinking what a visionary deal it was. You know, a really smart group of people got together from the town, there was a developer involved, and of course Walpole Youth Soccer, and we had this massive issue at the time of fields and fields availability, which quite frankly we still struggle with to this day. And what those three groups were able to do is put an agreement in place that allowed us to resolve that fields issue in really relatively short order and create really a very nice facility down on Mylod Street that could be used for what was a growing soccer program at the time. And over the years, that whole program has just grown and really become something that's really incredible. I don't know how many tens of thousands of kids have gone through that program, but it's a huge number in the 20 some odd years that we've been doing this. And quite honestly, the spirit of that original deal was, we've got a problem, the town can't solve it, this group stepped up, we got the land donated, we put a deal in place that said, if you can do all the private fundraising and if you can do all the maintenance, then we'll lease you the field for $1 a year. I don't know exactly how much money Walpole Youth Soccer has put into those fields, but it's over $1 million for sure in terms of the build costs and the maintenance that has occurred on those fields over the years. The other thing I learned from the answers to the questions that David asked, which was really informative to me, was that Walpole Youth Soccer also takes care of the Ellis fields. I didn't realize that. I thought it was just the Mylod fields, but it's not. And so we would need to be thinking about the Ellis fields as well if we were to switch this agreement in some fashion. But I keep coming back to the spirit of the original deal. Why did we do it to begin with? The visionary people that actually put that deal in place, solving a very thorny problem for the town, and a solution that has worked beautifully for 26 years. And I just don't understand why we would mess with that. So my own view is, after having gone through the data, and David, I'll give you a lot of credit for asking for those questions because it did give us the ability to go through that data. It is very hard for me to see that there's an alternative that anybody could put on the table that would be more attractive than the one we already have. And when I think about the work we're doing up at 1A right now and how that's likely to close down now, the field's issue that we've suffered with for 25 years, I can't help but see this as just, an important part of the overall program and one that, I'm fully supportive of. I think that going back to the spirit of the original deal, I think that still exists today. And frankly, I'm 100% supportive of it. So unless someone does come up with an alternative that they can position as being more attractive than the one we already have, it's hard for me to believe that I would you'd move me off that mark. That said, this is an important vote, and that's why I wanted to make sure we have the full board here, so that we get all the voices heard. So my expectation is that we'll come back again in 2 weeks. We'll have a similar conversation to the one we've had. Perhaps there'll be an alternative put forth. I don't know if there will be or not. And that we'll take a vote, because we need to move on, in my view. So that's answering your question, Ben, what I think is going to happen in 2 weeks. But I do want the full board to vote it. So let me pause there and see if there are any last points to be made before we close out the discussion on this topic tonight and pick it up in a couple of weeks.
If I can just chime in here. First of all, Ellis is a different story, because Ellis is actually part of Bird Park and not town-owned land. So that's a whole different discussion. But the alternative is that you just charge them the same set of fees that you charge any other organization who uses the town land. That's what I'm looking at.
Okay, so are you going to bring a specific proposal in 2 weeks? Is that the thought?
Well, my view would be that you charge them exactly what you charge other youth groups for using town land, and it's not an exclusive agreement, so that if some other group also wants to use that land and wants to pay the fees for certain times, that they can also use the fields for those times as they're available. Just like we do with every other piece of recreation land that we have out there. Whether it's the Little League or lacrosse or other organizations, they are paying for fees for the use of the field.
Okay, thanks, David. And again, thank you for actually pushing those questions. It was actually very helpful in this process, so thank you. So I think we've concluded that part of our conversation. So let's move on to our next topic of conversation. And I see that Lauren Goldberg has joined us, our town council from Copeland and Page. So Lauren, nice to see you tonight. And the topic that we're going to cover is the vote on the election and moving the election date to a different date. So Jim, why don't I turn it over to you to kind of work us through, you and Liz, to work us through what you guys have come up with and proposed based on the meeting that we had a couple weeks ago, where we charged you to go and come back with a series of answers to questions that we had, and then we'll get down to the discussion and vote. So Jim, I'll give it first.
So what we did here is took some notes and we looked at the meeting again just to make sure we were both on the same page. So initially the board charged us to look at 3 options: special legislation, support legislation that's applicable to all cities and towns across the Commonwealth, ensure that we're ready to go with the special court order. So we looked at some dates, looked at some options here, looked at what are other towns doing across the state. So the recommendation we came up with is postponing the election until June 27th. That'll allow us enough time to get out the information on the early voting, the absentee voting, advertise this as much as possible. Liz is going to do some public service announcements. And I've already spoke to all of our legislators on this one. They're supportive of special legislation and general legislation across the state. Senator Feeney and Representative McMurtry let me know today that they are very optimistic that we're going to have an answer after probably by Tuesday or so next week as to whether general legislation across the Commonwealth is going to be a thumbs up. I guess there's some odds at the Senate and the House on some of this municipal reform bills that they're proposing. And if we don't have an answer by them, we'll ask them to go forward with special legislation. Representative Dooley let me know that he thinks it could take about maybe 4 or 5 days to get special legislation that's Walpole specific. So either way, if we don't have any legislation, we're going to pursue the court action, and Lauren's going to pursue that through the courts. So we've started to work on a public notification strategy for this. We're going to go on Facebook, the website, Twitter, Walpole Media Corp, signboards, the COA newsletter. Liz is going to do a reverse 911 to residents to let them know as we get closer to this. Walpole Times, Hometown Weekly, we'll do some advertisement there. We'll do those electronic boards that we have throughout town. We'll advertise on that one along with town meeting date. And we'll make sure we get out as much notice as possible. We talked about the early voting strategy. We'll get out there. We'll make sure that there's plenty of PSAs available to people so they know how to do it. We'll show them what the ballots look like. We'll walk them through the steps, make sure that we're available to answer any questions about early voting and absentee voting. And the plans, logistical plans, we've already started talking with Don Anderson and the police and the fire about logistical, making sure that people maintain their 6-foot distance. We got about 200 protective face shields for the poll workers last week. Don's working on, he's got a bunch of those plexiglass screens coming in that we can use. We'll have plenty of cleaning supplies on hand. The problem Liz expressed to me is poll workers. That could be a problem. We might have a shortfall there, but as part of the special legislation, we're going to request that we waive the number of poll workers there. Because as you know, some of our poll workers are on the older side, and we want to be mindful of them. And some of them have already reached out and said, sorry, but I'm not interested in this election. That's totally understandable. And I did, you know, all of you probably know we only really have one contested race. That's among the Board of Selectmen. I reached out to Tom Brown, spoke to him Friday evening before I sent this to the board. I explained to him what my recommendation was. His response was, it is what it is, that's fine. So he's aware of the situation. Obviously, we have a couple of smaller races with town meeting, but the selectmen's race was, the select board race was the one I wanted to make sure that everybody understood. So Liz, did I miss anything?
Liz, you're on mute.
Oh, she was having this problem yesterday.
Okay.
Oh, here she is.
Okay.
There you go.
I know, I think you hit them all. I just prayed for the special legislation that we didn't fall under the governor's orders. Is I am very interested in reducing the staff. And then just so that we can at least open, I'm asking my leadership staff of all of that if they are willing, you know, if they are coming in. Some of them have sent me schedules, but I need to know that they're also willing to work, so that if I had to ad lib, I've already put together a standard operating procedure for anybody new that wants to work the polls to help us out. So I have that put together, and it basically walks you right through the whole election. And that will be my training for, because I usually train them before every election. So that will be my training piece where we can't meet in groups of 10 or more. So that'll be out there as a reminder to the ones that work. But if my leadership staff is all on board, I think if I had to ad-lib it a little bit, we would be all right. As far as the early voting and absentee voting, totally going to encourage that, just like Jim stated. But more importantly, that's where I'm going to need people to open envelopes and get them through the tabulate. So if I can, if we don't have that big of a public turnout to the event, they can be doing that all day while we're waiting for the few that come in. You know, it would mean additional police officers. And back to what we originally started with at the start of this meeting was, all right, we hope they're going to have masks, but then again, there I will have to probably offer the same so as not to make, you know, a scene for you can't come in and vote because you don't have your mask on. So, you know, we'll have to make sure we have that kind of supplies. But can I take care of the poll workers? Absolutely. Big shout out to Mark Gallivan for the 200 face shields that we got. You told me there's another 200 more, because you also have to remember it's not just this election. I have 2 more coming right down the pipe. And hopefully people will choose to pick all elections on the application that's currently online, so that it's not we have a good idea of the number going forward the whole time.
And just one thing I meant to add too, part of the recommendation is reducing the hours that the polls are going to be open. We have the flexibility in Walpole because it's not defined. You have to be open 8 to 8. That's more of a tradition on our end. Liz and I have kicked around the idea of 10 to 4. She told me she was comfortable with 8 to 5. So that's also part of our recommendation. One of the reasons I asked the chief to stay on and Melissa to make sure that we have added police presence. We're probably going to have some people outside enforcing the 6-foot rules. We talked about restricting the number of people that we allow in. So that'll be part of our SOPs that Liz mentioned, and making sure that we have more personnel on there to enforce that.
Chief, would you add anything to anything Jim has said or Liz has said?
No, I just echo what everybody else has said. It's we're used to doing these, so I know this is a little bit different than how we usually handle it, but we could certainly add on the extra officers for the different polling places, and that won't be a problem for us at all.
Okay, thanks, Chief. Melissa, anything that you would add?
No, I think all the procedures that Jim mentioned are great. I know Liz has been super proactive and provided floor plans to both myself and Dawn Anderson so we can get a better gauge on floor markings, directional arrows, and obviously hoping to do the best with like a one-way in, one-way out to limit contact.
Great, thank you, Melissa. And Lauren, I know you're there, and as you listen to this conversation, anything that you would add to the dialogue at this point?
Mr. Chair, the team, I think the team is doing a great job to get prepared. These are everyone keeps using the word unprecedented, but we haven't run an election like this, and I think all of the different aspects of town government are cooperating really well together to make sure it's safe for both the workers and the voters. And that's exactly what you would hope to have. So, and we've discussed all sorts of potential options and ideas, and I think, we have several weeks to go before we need to have a finalized plan. So I think there's still time to, any learning that's done in the clerk community and the election community, we'll be able to incorporate as we go forward.
Thank you, Lauren. Okay, let me open it up for discussion to any of the folks that have been presenting thus far. So, Mark, let me start with you.
All right, I think delaying the election a couple of weeks to make sure we can keep everybody safe is a win-win for everybody. I think I've had a conversation with Liz. I think you feel pretty comfortable with barriers and shields and all those different things, which is great. Same with Melissa. I know you've got a lot of work to do, and it's going to cause work for you just before the election with making lines and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's good, and I'd really like to encourage people to vote by mail and request their absentee ballot or early voting ballot. I think that's a win for everybody. I would ask the question, because I got asked twice today, when do you think somebody fills out a form, they send it in, when do you think they'll get a ballot? That was the question I was asked.
So I ordered the ballots today. So I have 2,000 coming ASAP, and then the rest will follow. So since I posted it on the website and described the differences of both the ballots, I've only gotten 5 to come in. But I also know the big push is to come, and then I think I'll see what we see.
Yeah. Okay, but it sounds like people have a lot of time to fill out the ballot and get it in. They won't be in a big rush, so.
Right. Oh no, absolutely. Especially if you if you vote the date of June 27. I think that gives people plenty of time. And like I told you, the application also gives them the option, if they take the absentee one, to choose all elections this year.
Great, thank you.
David, I'll go to you next.
Okay. Just thinking about the structure and the layout of where we have voting, I just think that Fisher may not be able to be all in that same room if you want to do this again. And I would think that you have to do something with Fisher and not have all those 3 precincts in that one small room, which are problematic, without trying to. It was cramped in there before social distancing. It's not going to be able to be organized in that fashion. Maybe use the hallways of the school or somehow otherwise something more creative is going to have to come out there. I would also, I know it's on the website, but maybe take this opportunity for someone to explain the difference between the absentee ballot and the and the early voting ballot. And I do take Ms. Gaffey's point that it would be good for especially our elders to do the absentee ballot and click off for all elections, because I am sure they're talking about another issue in the fall, and you know, on that particular day when that election comes up, they just may feel uncomfortable going out. So it may be a good opportunity to get them to check out for all elections, and I appreciate that. I'm very disappointed in, I looked back at actually the set of minutes that we have to approve tonight, and there was a discussion at that time that and I won't call out any particular member of the delegation, but the discussion was that the legislation was imminent, that the legislation was coming soon, and now it's 3 weeks later and we're getting that same comment. It's, you know, we really don't have the approval at this point to make it any other date than June 6th, and that really concerns me. I'm sure we are going to get it, but I'm nervous about that. I think we should have, it would have been a lot nicer if the state government had addressed this issue sooner, and if we had not relied on the representations that there was something in the pipeline. So I don't know what to say at this point. I guess it's felt since it's the suspender's time where we pursue the litigation, pursue the court approval at the same time as we seek the state approval. So I'm just nervous about getting all this done in the short time that we have left.
Well, the good news, and David, I share your concerns, but the good news is this board's been pretty proactive, and we came up with the 3 suggestions, working with Lauren and Jim and Liz and others to progress, and we've been progressing them. And so I feel quite confident that we will get an approval one way or the other. And the question came up in a dialogue we had with Jim and myself and Liz and Lauren about this, about, well, you know, what if we get to the end and for some reason we actually don't have the approval? So Lauren, I wonder if I could just ask you to jump in and talk about, you know, what we discussed the other day and why that's not something for us to be concerned about.
Yeah. So I think one of the most important things with respect to election law is this idea of certainty with respect to elections. And as we know, this election season has been rendered uncertain by, you know, at nobody's fault, but it certainly has been uncertain. And so that's why we've seen the legislature jump in and authorize an extension of time for elections until later in the spring and through the end of June. You guys just happen to be kind of right after the time frame that they originally identified. I think the reality of why that is that at the time, nobody really anticipated that this is what things would be like down the road. We really didn't have any idea about that then. So I think the thought was, if you have your election in early June, you'll easily be able to reschedule, to hold it by then. That just really isn't the case. And I think the legislature, for better or for worse, I think the legislature has a lot of things on its plate. And so trying to get the attention that you guys need, and I think I've mentioned before, Jim, it's not just the town of Walpole that's in this spot. There's other towns as well. And there's a lot of other kind of smaller issues relative to elections that continue to be a problem for many, many towns. This issue, I think, has been elevated and has been, you know, on the radar of several of the town's representatives, but just wanting to get something done right now isn't something that we necessarily are able to do. On the other hand, and I started off this dialogue by talking about certainty with respect to elections, and I know that's what you're looking to give to the voters. So what I had indicated earlier is that using this 3-pronged approach, we will get approval. The question is exactly on what date we will get approval. Using the 3 prongs, we know we can go into court if we need to on an emergency basis. But even if for any reason whatsoever, the board says this election is on the 27th, and for some reason something doesn't happen to get that in writing ahead of time. There is, in fact, the ability to validate and ratify and confirm after the fact. And what would be the most difficult thing, I think, for voters would be to have uncertainty as to when the election is going to happen. So because of that, we discussed making a decision about the date of the election, telling the voters that's the date that the election will be held, and then doing what we need to behind the scenes to make sure, and by behind the scenes, I mean not at a meeting, in court or with the legislature, to try and get an outcome as soon as possible that's supportive of the town's position. Anybody who would have an axe to grind with respect to the scheduling, certainly, there are so many reasons why picking a date further down the line makes sense from a public health and safety perspective, from a planning perspective, and the concept of using early voting and absentee voting and really being able to highlight that for voters requires a little more time to get that done. And I think the legislature's made very clear that they do think that's the safest way for people to participate right now. So this gives people the broadest range of options and allows sufficient time to get that certainty that we need. It also is early enough that anybody who might otherwise be confused about the date will know now and can plan now for that future date. So there's a lot of reasons why making a decision at this time and then looking to get that decision ratified makes really good sense. And as I said, I don't think you are the only ones in this particular spot. I think the legislature, if they do wind up being unable to move things forward quickly, we'll see a lot of special acts coming in requesting ratification for actions taken with respect to elections and town meetings. So I think we have to understand that there needs to be a little bit of flexibility in terms of rule making while we get that done. But glad to have voters be able to know what they should plan for.
Exactly. Thank you, Lauren. Ben, let me go to you.
I don't really have anything to add after that. Just a comprehensive explanation of how everything should go. I appreciate that, Lauren. And I would just say I really appreciate Liz Gaffey and Jim and Patrick's work and Melissa and everyone that's put into that. I mean, it's been 2 weeks since we last met, right? We discussed it and we put the barest framework of a plan out there. And here we are today discussing a relatively detailed plan, how to keep people safe, and how to keep the vote in an efficient manner and make sure that everybody has the ability to vote. So it's just a fantastic job, and I would just offer this board's support going forward with whatever you all need to keep it going.
Yeah, and I'll just wrap by saying I agree with what you said, Ben. And Lauren, you make the point about certainty. That's what really this vote tonight is about, is creating that certainty to the voters. And that's where I'm drawing my comfort from. I want to also just say that, we did ask Jim and others to pull this plan together 2 weeks ago. And you, as a team, you really have done a great job pulling it together. So kudos to all of you. Very well done. So with that, I'm going to draw the discussion to a close and move us to a vote. So, Ben, could I have a motion, please?
So I'd make a motion to hold the town election on June 27th, 2020.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, so we'll do roll call. I'm sorry.
Before you finalize your vote, I just want to make sure the board's comfortable with the hours and recommendations. Liz, you're good with 8 to 5, or I just want to make sure.
I feel like that gives everybody a chance, because they are going to start to be out in public at that point, provided that the 18th truly opens up and people are outside. So I think 8 to 5, they're running their errands, whatever. If that's a fair time.
Okay. So Jim, if you don't mind, or Ben, with that amendment to the motion.
Well, I'd like to discuss that. I don't think the end time should be changed. The start time certainly can be changed.
Okay. Any further discussion on that point? Ben, I'll go to you next.
I don't have any specific comment on the hours. Whatever Liz and Jim feel is most appropriate. I prefer to be as available as possible. So if you all viewed that the most accessible hours were 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., I'm fine with that. If it's something other than that, I'm fine with that as well. But I would just say that my feeling is the largest range possible is what's needed here, that we can have folks at the polls working and be safe.
Thanks, Ben. Mark?
Yeah, I would kind of mimic what Ben said. I don't really care what the hours are, as long as there's an agreement between the town clerk's office, the police, and health department that they can support, whatever that range of time is. 8 to 5 is, what's that, 9 hours? That's a pretty good range. But I'm not hung up on the specific start time and the specific end time.
Okay. And nor am I. We've asked you guys to put the plan together with your recommendation, with the overriding factors being what? Safety of the poll workers, safety of the voters. We asked that we put a communication strategy in place that stressed the early voting so that we would minimize the number of people who would actually come to the polls on election day. And we're going to do all the other things that we talked about. I won't recap them. To create as safe an environment as we possibly can. And so as part of what we've asked you to do, you've come back and said your recommendation is to open the polls 8 to 5, I'm sorry. And that to me is a good wide range that gives people all day to get to the polls. And I don't think that anybody could say that that's not sufficient time, especially given early voting and absentee voting. So lots of ability to vote here. And so if that's your recommendation, then again, I'll support that.
It is.
Okay. All right, David, just because I know you objected that, I want to swing back through you one more time and just get any closing comments.
I'll be voting no for 2 reasons. Because I don't think we have the authority to change the time. We don't have the authority to do anything at this point. I'll also be voting no as to the change of the date because we don't have the authority to do that right now. We should have had this information already. 3 weeks ago, we set down the criteria for the different ways that we were going to get the authority, and we should have had that authority by now. I think it's pretty unfortunate at this. And that authority should have been received before we picked the date. So this is really, in my mind, a meaningless vote because you have no authority to pick that date. Am I okay with June 29th? That's a good date. That's fine. But we don't get to pick that yet. As far as the law is concerned, it's currently scheduled for the June 6th date. This is horrible. Horrible that we don't have authority, that we are not ready and able and to continue the election date. And I would suggest that this get done, that we don't wait for the legislation. We go to the court tomorrow, and we have a special meeting. It's within 48 hours after the court approval, and then at that point vote to move the date.
Okay, so Lauren, I'm going to go to you. David is concerned that we don't have the authority to take this vote, that it's a meaningless vote, and the other things that he said. I want to make sure that we do have the authority to take this vote, and that it is not a meaningless vote for all the reasons we've already discussed. So could you opine on that, please?
Yes, yes, sir, Mr. Chair. So I would say that in regular circumstances, the date that is set in the charter bylaws for the date of the election is something that we wouldn't even think twice about. We would hold the election on that day. For all the reasons that we've been discussing, the COVID-19 pandemic has made it dangerous for people to be together, and the governor has issued an order limiting groups of 10 or limiting groups to 10 people total. In fact, though, the stay-at-home advisory is even stronger than that, and it says that any non-essential businesses are closed, that there's only certain essential businesses that can open, and further that even the non-essential, even the essential businesses need to practice appropriate social distancing, etc. Because of that, the legislature recognized that municipalities needed relief, and that relief was to allow the postponement of elections. They picked the date of May 31st or May 30th. That date turns out to not be sufficient to protect the voters. And the board, in my opinion, has the ability to make a decision that that is the case and to determine that it will set the date for the 27th. Clearly, we will look for the appropriate ratification of the validity of that date, and have been. I know that Jim's talked to state reps. He's mentioned that tonight. I've talked to state reps. I know that the House is considering the Senate's bill on municipal governance, and that these things are being considered as part of it. I also am aware that should need be, we can go to court to get a court order for the same reason. And as the town administrator indicated, we will not wait until the day before. This is not Wisconsin, and we're not going to leave that kind of uncertainty. We're going to pursue a certain answer and well enough in advance that we can provide that assurance to voters. However, providing them with notice now and allowing those absentee and early voting ballots to be addressed, to be sent out, will ensure that there is safe voting going on right now, and that we have time to prepare the way that we need to for the election. I would point out that right now there are no advisories from the state, from the governor's office as to how to hold a safe election. That clerks that have been, there have been a couple of elections that were held for state senatorial districts, and there will be a couple of elections for state senatorial districts, and hopefully we'll find out more about how to hold a safe election from what the state and those communities come up with. In the meantime, the only way, from my perspective, that this board moves forward is by choosing the date and then authorizing, as we talked about, that three-prong approach: choose the date, authorize a special legislation, support any general legislation, and authorize the firm to go to court if need be to secure the date.
Great, thank you, Lauren. So as we prepare to take this vote, I just want to be on record as saying it is my belief that we are totally authorized to take this vote, and based on the things that Lauren has just said, and want to be very, very clear on that for the record.
But that's not what Lauren said. What Lauren said is we need approval from either the legislature or the court in order to move the election. So us voting to move the election is a nullity unless we have that approval.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
You should have had that already.
Thank you. This is one of those situations, I believe, it's kind of a chicken or an egg situation, the way that we're discussing it. Either you could have the vote first and then pursue the authority, the ratification afterward, or you could pursue the ratification or the permission before. I think in this case it would actually be hard for us to go to court and say, please give us the permission, versus saying, this is how we are looking to proceed, please approve. So the idea from the start has been to protect the voters and to protect the staff, and I think the board's approach is perfectly reasonable. As I said, we will, if the legislature does not make any significant moves, we will go to court and present the case. And I think there's every reason to expect that a court would understand that the May 31st date was decided by the legislature at a time when that was determined to be safe for elections to be held. So, I don't know that there's much more to say on that. I do think the board, in my opinion, is acting prudently to address it and move it forward. And so I do think it's fine for the board to vote tonight, to take that vote, and we will proceed as discussed to ensure that there are no questions going forward.
Great, thanks, Lauren. Ben, could you please read the motions?
So we'd make a motion to hold the town election on June 27th.
I'll second that.
Okay, and all in favor, please say aye by roll call vote. Mark?
Aye.
David?
No.
Ben?
Yes.
And Jim, yes. So 3-1-0, the motion carries. Do we also have a motion to proceed on the three-pronged approach as we've been calling it?
We can make one.
Do we need to, or have we already done that?
Did that on April 28th.
Yeah, so I think we're good there, so no need to do that.
So Jim, just if I could jump in, Lauren and Liz, we got all our bases covered just so we can, three of us can work to make this thing happen. Okay, Liz, you're shaking your head, Lauren.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, go ahead, Lauren.
No, Liz, you first.
No, I was gonna say that those are the three things I wanted. It's the, while she puts it up, change the date, staff, we changed the hours. That was part of your vote. And, we moved the last date.
Okay, Jim, you all set?
Yeah, as long as Lauren and Liz are good, we're good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good, Lauren, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, and Chief and Melissa and others, thank you. Okay, on to our next order of business, which is the town administrator's update. So, Jim?
Yeah, sure. Just while I have everyone still here, Liz and Lauren and Melissa and the Chief. Update on town meeting. Dan picked the date for town meeting today. It's going to be held Saturday, June 20th. It's going to be held at the Walpole High School on the football field. Proposed rain date of Sunday, June 21st. Dan's going to be, his plan is to address 3 articles. FY21 operating budget for the whole town, the sewer and water budget, those are 2 separate articles. So just those 3 articles. All other articles he plans on referring back to petitioner to not raise any issues with the zoning articles. He's going to coordinate with Liz and I as to getting information out there. He's going to do a public service announcement. We're meeting with department heads later on this week to kind of figure out logistics with holding it on the football field. We've talked about doing a phased-in approach as far as check-in for people starting probably at it's going to be held at noon, so we're going to start probably around 11 with 2 precincts on separate entrances, 15 minutes each, and let people check in that way. We're going to probably block off 10 by 10 foot sections. This will all come in the plan. We'll advertise on the signboard, same places we're advertising with the town election. Signboards, websites, Facebook, Twitter, newspaper, reverse 911, Dan offered to do that. So we're going to get out as much information as possible just to consider those 3 articles. So I know this is kind of news to all of you, but this just happened late this afternoon. So Dan issued a declaration extending it from June 3rd to June 20th, and we're going to go forward. The Chiefs is going to send something into the AG's office and work with all the department heads, Board of Health, everyone involved to make sure it's safe out there for everyone who comes out that day. So I'll kind of just, Jim, I know this is kind of a surprise to all of you, but I wanted to bring it up as kind of my first update. Melissa, Lauren, Liz, Chief, anything to add? Okay, so that's it on my end. So before I go into the other updates, I'll just let you kind of let me know if you have any questions. I know people are going to have a lot of questions as we progress through this and we get the word out, but much more to come on that one.
Yeah, I'm just glad that we've got the date, Jim. It's important that we take care of particularly the financial matters of the town, and but do it, of course, in a way that's safe. Much like the discussion we had on the election, we've got to make sure we protect the town meeting members. And so I think you've got a solid plan here, and I'm glad we have a date. So thanks to town moderator Dan Bruce for doing that, and we'll move forward. So thanks, Jim.
Okay, thank you. FY20 and 21 budget. FY20 budget, I think we're pretty much all set. Any funds that need to be transferred or moved around, we can do that with the reserve fund or the interdepartmental transfer. As Jody previously mentioned, we're looking okay as far as cash flow and taxes coming in. Building permits are still being taken out. Building commissioner updated me a couple days ago. So his department is going full speed ahead with permits and inspections and issuing permits. So we're set on FY20. For FY21, we just about have a balanced budget. I'll be finalizing that this week with Jody. I have Jody and someone else checking all the personnel numbers for me. And I got to meet with the personnel board next week also to make sure they're comfortable with changing their recommendation or going along with the recommendation on the living adjustments to make no living adjustments for FY21 and addressing some of the vacation carryover time that's accrued for all the people who work through this nonstop in the police, fire, some here in town hall too. So I will have a budget prepared by the end of next week, probably before, to present to you and the finance committee, and so they can start to run through it, but it's going to have a lot of cuts in it. Questions? Okay. Furloughs, we laid off about 80, we furloughed about 80 employees, about 60 on the school side and about 20, 25 on the town side between library and recreation over the last 2 weeks. We don't know when we're going to bring these people back. We don't know when we're going to open these buildings up. We've reached out, sent them all letters, and they're able to collect the unemployment now, and hopefully we'll be able to bring them back sometime this summer whenever everything's safe to open up. Corona update, Melissa, jump in if I missed anything on this one. At this time, we have 205 cases confirmed positive here in Walpole. 163 of those are closed out. 172 have completed monitoring. 33 cases are currently undergoing the monitoring. So the numbers have gone down. We were seeing about 2 to 4 a day come in or so, which is an improvement versus the 16 to 20, 25 that we saw at one point. And Melissa, anything to add on that one? I know Trish Fisher's doing a great job tracking. I know we've kind of been able to hand off some of those responsibilities, but we're following up with her and the school nurses who are helping out.
Yeah, definitely kudos to our public health nurse, Trish Fisher. She recently obviously started in August, so we are a newer office, but she's totally taken on the task. We're very fortunate to also have 3 of our school nurses helping out, as well as we are utilizing the Department of Public Health contact tracers. So that's a huge help as well to divide the workload. So everyone's plugging along and conducting thorough investigations, which is huge to limit exposure and obviously reduce the number of COVID cases.
Okay, thanks. So that's it for COVID. Just the next month ahead, we're going to be busy, very, very, very busy. We expect at least, I'm going to have at least one Zoom outreach session with town meeting members to review the budget, review the specific parts of the budget. We're going to set it up so they can ask me questions during that outreach session. I just got to figure out the logistics on it, making sure that everybody who wants to get on can get on. Worst case, we'll have another session. I'm going to work with Liz to ensure that we have enough info out there about the voting process, advertising as much as possible. Finance committee is going to get their budget, review it. We'll explain all the cuts that we've made and the changes we've made to the budget during the presentation to them. We'll be holding the FinCom public hearing, which is required the Thursday before town meeting via the Zoom app, so people can jump in and ask their questions of the FinCom. We do have to address the distribution of warrants to residents and town meeting members. I think now that Dan's made the decision and I'm ready to push forward a balanced budget, we can give something to the residents as far as the warrant and make sure it meets all the requirements and it's out to them. We've developed a re-entry plan for town employees whenever it's safe to come back to work and eventually have residents in here. The plan's been drafted. Melissa, Chief Bailey, and a bunch of other department heads are reviewing it for me to make sure that they're comfortable with it. I expect that re-entry plan will be updated on a fairly regular basis as things change, but I want to have something in place, some type of framework, and ready to go. And we continue to do the public updates every Friday on a regular basis. I'll continue that with the residents that we started back in March. It seems like a lot of them watch that on Walpole Cable TV. And I mentioned going to the personnel board about vacation time for employees who've worked through that, but we'll make sure the personnel board's comfortable with it. So it's going to be a busy month and a half, but we're ready for it. That's it, Jim.
Great update, Jim, and again, just thanks to everything you're doing and that the team is doing. It's amazing what you guys are dealing with right now, and I just really appreciate all the good work you're doing. We open it up for discussion, questions for Jim on his report. So, Mark, start with you. Anything for Jim?
Nothing specific, Jim. Once, I'm sure when you're ready with the budget number, you'll run it by us. Looking forward to take a look at that. I know that it's going to be kind of a process for everybody to gear up for a sort of a short town meeting and go through the budget process sort of on a small basis. But I think that's an important step for us to do and get the new fiscal year 21 started off the right way. So thanks. I appreciate all the hard work by everybody.
Thanks, Mark. Ben?
Yeah, I guess a couple of questions. Just one, Jim, with the town meeting, and I know that you said that this came together this afternoon with the declaration, and that obviously we're going to have to formulate a plan of not just the advertising, which is maybe kind of self-explanatory, but also the logistics of holding it. When do you think that you, and perhaps you haven't been able to talk to Dan about it, but when is there going to be a plan as far as here are the dates over the next, because it's what, eight weeks away, a little over 8 weeks, so 2 months, so we have some time. But what are the dates? You mentioned the Thursday before, the FinCom public hearing. You mentioned that next Friday, by the end of next week, you're going to have a budget that FinCom can start to review. If we could get a schedule for folks saying this is when these actions are going to happen, I think it would really be helpful. And a date of, hey, we're going to have a protocol for the date of town meeting on this date. It's not going to be next week. There's a lot of planning going into it, just so everybody knows how it's going forward.
Oh, my plan is to meet out on site with department heads and to brainstorm as to how we're going to handle this out on the field. I think one of the reasons Dan picked the field is it's one of the most open spaces in town. It's a lot of it's handicap accessible. There's plenty of parking spaces up there. There's a public announcement system up there already in place up at the press box. So there's a lot of things going for us. We just got to hope the weather stays. So I think next week I'm going to have a plan, and I'm going to start at the end and back out that way on the 20th and go backwards to ensure that I have to see how much time the printer needs to get the warrant out there. I'm going, something David said earlier with the state not coming forward. I don't have any guidance on the state. I'm just assuming a 10% budget cut across the board for state aid, Chapter 72. So, and I've talked to a lot of other towns. That's what most of them are assuming. That's about a $1.2 million cut for us. So I've already backed that out about a couple of weeks ago, and just work forward with that assumption. So I think next week I should have a good game plan in place, starting from the end and working to now.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, and I really appreciate that, Jim. And people like to have it where they can go to the website or whatever. It's like, hey, FinCom's this date, this date, this date. These are the steps, similar to the election. So the sooner that we can have that out to everybody, so that they have clarity, I think definitely the better. And I think I have one other thing here. No, FinCom. Oh, one other thing, and it's not a question so much, Jim, as I just wanted to bring it up here so that everybody would know about it, and if they watch the videos. But we had seen in an update a couple of weeks ago how the 40B project at Summer Street had resubmitted a bunch of information. So I know that was put up on the website, but they have, the developer, Omni, has answered all of the letters that were sent by town departments, that were sent by the select board, the peer review for traffic that was done by the town's consultant. So all that information is up there now on the 40B page that Ashley Clark put together, that if people want to look at it and go through it. The next hearing before the ZBA is May 20th, right? And they're expecting at that point to continue public hearing again, which is legal and within the rights set forth by the legislature for them to continue it. We don't have to have that yet, obviously. But I just wanted to reiterate all that and make sure that people knew they could go to the town website for all that new information. And there is a lot of it, a lot of new submissions.
Well said.
Thanks. Thanks, Ben. David?
Okay, well, yep, I'm good. glad that that was a good idea about having a Zoom session ahead of time with representative town meeting members. And Mr. Johnson's always been available to people, so as this process goes along, I hope that people that have more intense questions can contact Mr. Johnson directly, and perhaps he could provide, a frequently asked questions list about the budget for the RTMs. But I think that's a great idea to head off some of those questions early on, and but at the same time give the RTMs ample opportunity to get the information that they need.
I like that. We can do that. That's easy.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Good update. Last order of business tonight is the approval of the minutes from the April 28th meeting.
I'd make a motion to approve the minutes of the April 28th, 2020 meeting.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Mark?
Nope.
Ben?
No discussion.
David?
No discussion.
And Jim, no discussion. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye by roll call vote. Mark?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Ben?
Yes.
And Jim, yes. 4-0-0, the minutes are approved. That concludes our agenda for this evening's meeting. I want to thank everybody who came and worked with us tonight and presented and so forth. We had quite a bit of important stuff to deal with tonight, and I appreciate all the work that went into that. I also, as always, want to thank Patrick from Walpole Media for taking good care of us tonight and helping to make sure all the technology works properly. And with that, we'll sign off. So good night, everybody. Thanks a lot.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.